Love, Lost, Rebirth, Alive. Blue Dolphins. The novel. By Makāula Nakae. Chapter 1. Boy Meets Boys. Episode 5. Long Distance Swim. Around 9:30 a.m. on Sunday morning, Hanalei walked from Kapahulu Avenue toward Diamond Head, the upbeat tempo of his earphones providing a sharp contrast to the quiet, salt-crusted air of the morning. When he arrived at the sparsely populated stretch of Queen Surf, he scanned the horizon for Jim, but found the shoreline mostly empty. He took a seat on a bench beneath the sprawling shade of a large tree near the beach house, gazing vacantly through his blue sunglasses at the dazzling, mirror-like surface of the Pacific. "Good morning, handsome," a voice called from behind. Hanalei turned to find Jim standing there, already stripped down to a navy swimsuit, a gear bag slung over his muscular shoulder. "Good morning." "You're already changed," Hanalei noted, feeling a momentary pang of regret for not being ready. "Of course. I came to swim," Jim replied simply. His tone was different today, clearer, more direct. This wasn't the neon Lee theater of a nightclub or the cruising atmosphere that often took over the Queen's Surf changing rooms in the late afternoon. This was the morning of the athlete and the local. The air was for breathing, not for the heavy sense of cologne and cigarettes. "I'll change quickly then," Hanalei said, heading toward the concrete beach house. He was relieved to find the changing room empty. He had no desire to deal with the lingering gazes or the ogling that typically haunted these public spaces. In the cool, damp privacy of the stalls, he quickly stripped off his clothes and slid into a cobalt blue Speedo. He grabbed his goggles, stowed his gear, and hurried back out to the sand where Jim stood waiting like a silent sentry against the blue. "Have you ever swum past the reef into the open ocean?" Jim asked, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The sun was still low, casting a serendipitous, splendid shimmer across the water's surface that turned the sea into a field of dancing diamonds. Hanalei couldn't hide his shock. His eyes widened as the weight of the suggestion sank in. Last time, he had stayed within the safety of the reef, keeping the War Memorial Natatorium as his boundary. Now, Jim was proposing they leave the shelter of the shallow turquoise water and strike out into the deep indigo heart of the open bay, a vast, unlimited seascape far from the comfort of the shoreline. "No," Hanalei replied, his voice echoing his disbelief. "Are you serious about swimming out past the reef?" Jim pointed toward the horizon, where the iconic pink Palisade Royal Hawaiian Hotel stood like a tiny, coral-colored jewel in the distance. "Yes. We'll swim out from this reef into the bay, head toward the Royal Hawaiian, and then loop back." Hanalei looked at the petite pink silhouette miles away in the center of the Waikīkī curve. "Are you joking? You want to swim that far?" "It's not as far as you think," Jim assured him, his voice calm and steady. "It's incredible out there. The water is crystalline, and the fish are everywhere. If we're lucky, we might even see a honu, sea turtle. You're a former swimmer? You'll be fine. You can make it there and back with no problem." Hanalei felt a cold knot of shallow anxiety tighten in his chest. In his competitive days, swimming was a controlled science. No waves, no currents, and the walls were always within reach. The open sea was a wild, living thing. Even when it looked calm and shining, it possessed a depth and power that felt fundamentally different. "I hope so," Hanalei murmured. He realized there was no turning back now. The safety arena of the shallow reef was behind him. The only way forward was out. Jim reached into his bag and offered Hanalei a jar of Vaseline while applying some under his own arms. It was a seasoned swimmer's trick, essential for long distances to prevent the brutal saltwater chafing that occurred with every stroke. In a swimming pool, whether for short or long distances, the stroke technique usually kept the arms spread wide enough from the armpits that the skin rarely rubbed. But in the ocean, where the salt acted like sandpaper and the water's density forced a different movement, that protection was the difference between a successful swim and a painful one. "Thanks, I appreciate it," Hanalei said, genuinely impressed. During his years of training in the chlorinated stillness of competitive pools, he had never needed such a thing. Jim's thoughtfulness and clear experience in the wild water made him seem less like the wild beast of the nightclub and more like a true guardian of the sea. Standing here, with the scent of salt and Vaseline in the air, the artificiality of the night before felt like a distant memory. Hanalei stretched his limbs, the muscles of his back rippling as he rotated his arms, before finally dipping his feet into the shallows. "Wow! The water is freezing," he exclaimed. The morning sea hadn't yet been kissed by the midday sun, and the chill was a sharp, crystalline shock to his skin. Jim just laughed, looking back with a grin that was both challenging and encouraging. Hanalei didn't hesitate. He took a deep breath, submerged his entire body in the cold embrace of the Pacific, and surfaced with a splash. It was the first rule of the natural water: don't think, just sink. After a few seconds of immersion, his internal thermostat clicked, and his body began the rapid adjustment to the sea's temperature. "There's a small channel at the end of this breakwater," Jim explained, pointing toward the jagged line of the shore. "We'll pass through there, navigate the rocks, and swim past the reef. It might be tough right now because it's high tide, the waves are going to be crashing in against us, but the open sea is clear sailing once we're past the breakers. You'll be amazed by the beauty of the bay once we're out." Hanalei fitted his goggles snugly, the rubber sealing out the world. He tried to quiet his mind, pushing back the anxiety of this unknown adventure. This wasn't the predictable blue lines of a swimming pool. This was a landscape of unpredictability. Even if the surface looked peaceful, he knew that beneath the waves lay a world of surge, current, and hidden geography. He wasn't sure what it would feel like to fight the incoming swell or navigate the sharp coral, but with Jim leading the way, he pushed off from the sandy bottom. "All right, let's go." Jim started swimming, and Hanalei followed close behind. As they moved alongside the breakwater, the ocean suddenly asserted its strength. Powerful waves surged toward them, white water churning in the narrow space. Jim swam with a veteran's grace, timing his strokes to duck under the crests and slide through the energy. Hanalei, however, was caught in the violence of the surge. The water shoved him backward, and for a moment, a cold spike of panic flared in his chest. He fought against the drag, swimming with everything he had just to keep Jim's heels in sight. They navigated the narrow channel at the end of the breakwater, passing over the jagged, uneven coral reef. Beneath them, tropical fish of every hue darted through the coral formations, but Hanalei had little time to admire them. He had to calculate his depth with every swell, wary of the rocks rising and falling beneath him as the tide pulled. With a final, grueling push, they cleared the last of the rocks and broke into the open sea. The transition was instant. The chaotic crashing of the reef vanished, replaced by an endless deep blue expanse. Panting, Hanalei stopped to tread water, ripping his goggles off to look back at the distance they had covered. "Now that we're past the reef, it's safe," Jim said, his voice remarkably steady despite the swim. "See the two Hilton towers over there? We're heading towards the Royal Hawaiian. The hardest part is over. The rest is easy." Hanalei looked out at the easy path. The surface wasn't flat. It was a series of large, rhythmic swells that made the horizon vanish and reappear with every breath. The depth beneath him was staggering compared to a pool. In the open ocean, the pressure and the sheer volume of water changed the way his muscles responded. Pushing down with his palms felt heavier, and his leg beats had to compete with the density of the deep. "Okay, got it," Hanalei murmured, pulling his goggles back on. As they resumed their course toward the Pink Palace, the environment shifted again. The water was crystalline, reflecting the overhead brilliance of the Hawaiian sun's silvery, pale blue fish, perfectly camouflaged for the open deep flickered past them like ghosts. Unlike the reef fish that clung to the rocks, these were creatures of the current, belonging to the void of the bay. Sunlight pierced the surface in long, shimmering needles, creating kaleidoscopic patterns on the sandy seabed far below. It was a continuous underwater dance of light and shadow, shifting endlessly across the white, refined sand of the deep bottom. Looking down at the pristine floor of the bay, the irony of the landscape isn't lost on Hanalei. Waikīkī was, in many ways, a masterpiece of artifice. The very sand beneath them was man-made or rather man-placed. To maintain the ideal tropical beauty expected by the world, unlimited volumes of white sand had been repeatedly transported from the other side of the island and poured over the native rock and silt. Even the seabed was a curated stage, a vast white canvas that had to be replenished to hide the natural world beneath. Yet, despite the artificiality of the sand, the way the light moved over it was undeniably divine. As they swam, the swaying of the ocean floor and the rhythmic flickering of the sun's rays created a hypnotic effect, pulling Hanalei deeper into his trance. The struggle of the reef was behind him. Now there was only the glide, the white sand, and the silent silver ghosts of the deep. But the distance began to take its toll. Hanalei's arms grew heavy, and his breath became ragged. He had to stop, treading water to catch his lungs. Jim slowed his pace and looked back, a teasing grin on his face. "You should quit smoking," he shouted across the water. When they finally reached the waters fronting the Royal Hawaiian, they came to a halt. Hanalei pulled his goggles up onto his forehead and simply floated, letting the gentle rhythm of the open ocean take over. Each slow, rhythmic swell lifted his body toward the sky before dropping him back down, the tide beginning its patient pull toward the distant shore. The chill had long since faded, replaced by a fresh, lively warmth that made him feel as if he were finally breathing in sync with the island itself. "This place is really beautiful," he managed, though the words felt small compared to the reality. From this vantage point, the perspective of Waikīkī was utterly transformed. They were far enough out that the shoreline noise was silenced, replaced by the rhythmic slosh of water against their ears. The parade of waterfront hotels didn't look like a crowded tourist strip anymore. Instead, they seemed to float atop the waves, cradled by the slow swing of the sea. The morning sun, still climbing, struck the high-rises with surgical precision. The deep shadows and blindingly bright surfaces gave the skyline a sharp, three-dimensional weight that made the world feel more real than it ever did on land. From out here, the beach was just a thin golden thread, stripped of its busy crowds and reduced to a silent backdrop. The swelling of the bay, large, slow, but possessing a formidable strength, felt like the deep breathing of a giant, a sensation of power that was entirely absent within the shallow, protected reef. "I told you so," Jim said. He didn't seem tired at all, his chest rising and falling with an easy, athletic grace. He watched Hanalei with a light smile, his stylist persona completely washed away by the salt, leaving behind the man who belonged to the water. "You were right." Hanalei smiled, gazing at the world-famous landmark and volcanic crater, Diamond Head, in the distance behind Jim. The sun shone directly above Diamond Head, and its light reflected off the water like diamonds, making it hard to see clearly. He remembered how much Kevin loved this Hawaiian legend and used to tell him about it. Floating in the deep swells off the Pink Palace, Hanalei looked toward the profile of Diamond Head. He remembered Kevin explaining that its true name was Lihi, named by Hi'iaka, the youngest sister of the volcano goddess Pele, because the crater's ridge looked like the forehead, lie of a yellowfin tuna, ahi. Kevin was obsessed with the epic of Pele and Hi'iaka, a story of power, resurrection, and the destructive nature of love. As they drifted in the rhythmic swells, Hanalei's mind retreated into the sanctuary of Kevin's voice. To Kevin, the landscape was never just rock and water. It was a living manuscript. He had spoken of Hi'iaka, the goddess of hula, and healing, as if she were an old friend. It was a mission born of a dream. Pele, the firebringer, had seen the handsome Chief Lohiu in her sleep and demanded he be brought to her side. She sent her youngest sister, Hi'iaka, on a perilous journey from the smoke of the Big Island to the lush cliffs of Kauai, promising in return to guard the girl's beloved lehua groves. But when Hi'iaka arrived, she found only a ghost. Lohiau had died of a broken heart. For 10 days, she chanted into the wind, weaving her healing magic until she snatched his spirit back from the brink, restoring the heat to his skin. Yet during the long, slow voyage home, the fire changed its hue. Rescuer and rescued found themselves bound by a forbidden affection, a quiet flame that neither dared to stoke, yet neither could extinguish. Impatience is the curse of goddesses. Suspicious of the delay, Pele broke her word, raining fire upon Hi'iaka's sacred groves until they were nothing but ash. When Hi'iaka saw the blackened remains of what she loved most, her restraint finally snapped. She embraced Lohiau in full view of her sister's wrath. In a catastrophic eruption of jealousy, Pele spewed her molten blood, entombing Lodiau in cooling lava. Though Hi'iaka would eventually reach for his spirit once more, the scars were permanent. The sisters were left divided by the very love they had sought to possess, a love that ultimately vanished into the indifferent blue of the Pacific. Hanalei felt the salt sting his eyes. Like Hi'iaka, he had tried to hold onto a spirit that was slipping away, only to watch the world burn around him. Lohiau had been turned into stone and carried to the ocean floor, but Kevin had been reduced to bone and ash, now compacted within a cold ceramic urn. To Kevin, the myth had been a map of the human heart, a warning of how quickly protection turns to destruction, and how love can be resurrected only to be lost again. Hanalei treaded water, feeling the weight of the legend beneath him. Like the sisters in the story, he was navigating a world where the things one loves most could be consumed by a sudden, violent death and heat. Floating atop the large, rolling swells, Jim spoke up. "I love swimming out here. The water is so clear and clean, not murky like it is near the shore. If you're lucky, you can encounter sea turtles, rays, or even barracudas. It takes effort to reach this depth, but the longer you swim, the better it feels. It's like a swimming high." "I understand that feeling," Hanalei replied. "I'm starting to feel it too. I'm relaxed but also strangely alert." They lingered in the waters off the Royal Hawaiian until their muscles felt rested, then struck out further into the blue. Beneath them, the coral reefs grew more vibrant. Schools of raccoon butterfly fish with their black masked eyes, majestic angelfish in vivid yellows and purples, and Moorish idols with their elegant trailing fins and bold black and white stripes darted through the coral-covered rocks. The further they pulled from the beach, the more the water seemed to sharpen, turning into a lens of absolute clarity. After a long stretch of drifting over the schools of fish, they turned, setting their course back toward Queen Surf at the base of Diamond Head. They passed over a vast bed of white coral before reaching an even more expansive sandy seabed. Here, the currents from the open sea and the point of Diamond Head converged in a silent, powerful dance. The water was so precise it felt invisible. As they approached the end of the sandy stretch, a low, jagged reef bed rose up to meet them again. "Okay, this is where it gets tricky," Jim cautioned, his head bobbing above the swell. "There are a lot of coral rock gates here. We have to swim through them carefully. Watch for the open spaces between the rocks and move through without stopping. Whatever you do, don't panic. Just float with the incoming waves and let them carry you through." "Got it," Hanalei said, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "I hope I make it through safely. You'll be fine. Don't worry too much." Jim's voice sounded easy, almost breezy, but Hanalei knew the reality beneath the surface was different. The waves were no longer rhythmic cradles. They were now forces of nature that could shove a man against the sharp, unforgiving teeth of the reef. Jim aimed for a narrow gap between the stones and sliced through with practiced ease. Hanalei followed, but as the jagged topography of the reef rose up to meet them, the swimming high evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp fear. The seascape was no longer beautiful. It was a labyrinth of black teeth. To make matters worse, a set of massive, powerful swells began to break right as they reached the threshold of the reef. The waves thundered against the coral, the force of the water doubling as it hit the shallow obstacles. Panic flared in Hanalei's chest. He hesitated, his rhythm breaking, and in a moment of desperation, he reached out to grab a jagged black rock in front of him. It was a grave mistake. As he clung to the stone, a mighty wave surged over him, the immense pressure trying to rip him from his perch and drag him back out to the deep. He held on with all his might, his fingers scraping against the barnacles and sharp edges, knowing that if he let go at the wrong moment, the sea would slam him back into the very rocks he was trying to avoid. "Oh my God!" he gasped as his head broke the surface for a fleeting second. "How can I get back through these dungeon-like rocks?" Every time a wave surged, his legs were tossed like kelp, bumping against the sharp black coral. He felt the sting of a dozen minor scrapes opening on his skin. Damn it! I shouldn't have grabbed on. Realizing that fighting the rock was a losing battle, he forced himself to let go. He took a ragged, deep breath and waited. He had to time the sea itself. As the next swell rose, he stopped fighting and swam with everything he had left. He used the momentum of the water to propel himself toward the next open space, keeping his strokes shallow and his body flat. The water level was dropping with the tide. If he sank too low, his chest would be raked across the reef. He had to float on the thin skin of the ocean, a ghost moving over the teeth of the earth. Finally, the end of the breakwater appeared. He spotted the narrow channel and threw himself into it. The current was a tug of war, shoving him forward only to suck him back, but he didn't stop. He kicked until his thighs burned, fighting through the final gate of the reef until the turbulence suddenly died away. The waves changed their tune, becoming gentle hands that naturally pushed his exhausted body toward the shore. I made it through. Hanalei flipped onto his back, floating at the inner edge of the reef. He did nothing but stare at the expansive, indifferent blue of the Hawaiian sky, his lungs burning and his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs as he let the tide carry him into the shallows. After resting for a while, he slowly swam toward the shore, where the gentle waves pushed his body onto the gravel beach. As he tried to stand, the receding water pulled at his legs with a surprising weight, making the transition back to land a final struggle. Jim, already on the sand, saw Hanalei's exhaustion and ran over, offering his hands to pull him up firmly. "Well done," Jim said, his voice bright with adrenaline as he patted Hanalei on the shoulder. "Thanks," Hanalei panted. It was terrifying. "I thought I might die, or at least be severely slaughtered when I hit the rocks at the beginning." He had to stand perfectly still, his head down, waiting for his breath to return so his legs wouldn't collapse beneath him. "That's why I told you to ride the waves initially." Jim laughed, pointing at Hanalei's face. "I remembered what you said," Hanalei replied, a faint, tired smile breaking through his shock. "But I didn't truly understand it until I hit the rocks a few times. Look at this. I got all these scrapes from the reef." He looked down at his legs. Long, thin scratches lined his skin, weeping a small amount of blood into the salt water like the marks of a spectral animal's claws. Limping slightly, the sharp gravel biting into his soles, he began to walk toward the lifeguard station. He looked up at the guard on duty, the reality of the morning finally settling in. He had survived the wild water, and the scars on his legs were the proof. "Hello, I scraped my legs on the reef. Can I get some disinfectant and bandages?" "Oh dear, you hit the reef, huh?" The lifeguard who stepped down was a Hawaiian woman with a powerful, well-toned physique that spoke of a life spent in the surf. Her white t-shirt, emblazoned with lifeguard in bold red letters, contrasted sharply with her beautifully tanned skin, a shade that mirrored Hanalei's own. She had deep brown eyes that held a sharp, observant kindness, and her long, curly hair was tied back, damp from the salt air. "Embarrassingly, yes," Hanalei admitted, his voice still a bit thin. "I panicked." I watched you two swim out. You look like advanced swimmers from here, she said, her eyes flicking toward Jim and then back to Hanalei's legs. She pulled out disinfectant wipes and a handful of large bandages from a first aid kit. Just be careful not to panic next time. The reef only bites when you fight it. She handed him the supplies, her movement steady and sure. What's your name? I'm Moani. You're local, right? Moani. The name felt like the air itself, a light, gentle breeze that carries the fragrance of the land out to sea. In the Hawaiian language, words are vessels for poetry, holding layers of meaning that a single English word could never capture. I'm Hanalei. I was born here, but I grew up on the mainland, he explained. I just moved back to Honolulu a few months ago. Welcome to your Aina homeland, she said, her smile widening into something genuinely warm. The word homeland didn't quite cover it. She was welcoming him back to the land that fed him, the earth that claimed his ancestors, and the very dust he was made of. Standing there on the stinging gravel, bleeding slightly from his battle with the sea, Hanalei felt a sudden, profound sense of arrival. He wasn't just a visitor or a tourist anymore. He was back in the place where even the wind knew his name. Hanalei walked toward the beach house and rinsed off under the outdoor shower, his eyes fixed on the distant line of the reef he had just conquered. As he carefully washed the sand from his skin, a thin stream of reddish-brown water, a mix of salt, silt, and blood, ran down his legs. Jim approached, tearing open a packet of disinfectant and pulling out a medicated sheet. Thanks, but I can do it myself, Hanalei said. His voice was calm, but there was a sudden quiet distance in it as he took the sheet. He looked down at his wounds with a blank, almost clinical expression, wiping the blood away and applying the antibiotic dressing with steady hands. Jim watched him, a flash of surprise crossing his face. He muttered that it wasn't such a big deal and he'd be fine, perhaps unsettled by how quickly Hanalei had retreated into his own headspace. Yeah, it's not that bad. It was just a mistake to get scared, Hanalei said, finally breaking the tension with a small laugh at his own expense. Seeing Jim's puzzled look, he tilted his head. Something wrong? No, not really, Jim replied, his tone shifting back to an indifferent cool. Want to go grab something to eat? After drying his hair and gathering their gear, they returned to the spot on the sand where Jim's friend Coco was sitting. We just got back from the Royal, Jim announced, introducing Hanalei. Hi, nice to meet you, Hanalei said, extending a hand. Coco took it, her eyes searching his face with a mix of curiosity and amusement. Did you swim all the way to the Royal together? How was it? She asked. It was stunning. Amazing, Hanalei said. You should try it. Oh no, I can't swim that far. And that reef? Terrifying, she said with a nervous smile. Was it your first time? Yeah. The return through the rocks was the hardest part. Look, he gestured to the fresh bandages. Jim laughed, enjoying the drama of the story. Oh my. I'm glad I stayed here, Coco said. I can manage the swim to the natatorium wall if I stay inside the reef, but that's about it. How about we do a few laps to the natatorium next week? Jim suggested, flashing her a mischievous grin. He knew her limits well. She might survive one lap, but two would be a stretch. I can try one. Let's do that, Coco laughed, turning her attention back to Hanalei as he lay down on the sand beside her. Jim stood over them, scanning the beach for other familiar faces until his phone began to ring. He stepped away to take the call, leaving them in the sun. I remember last week, Coco said, her voice dropping into a more intimate conversational tone. Jim saw you swimming and went over to say hi. So, how are you guys doing? Getting along okay? Yeah, Hanalei replied. I'd seen him at the club before, but we never really talked until he came over here and invited me out. And today you went all the way to the Royal. That's brave, she laughed. She knew Jim's history. He had recruited several candidates for his open water adventures, and not many of them had the stomach to stick around for a second trip. It was definitely a challenge, Hanalei admitted. Coco nodded, beginning the standard information gathering that governed the social circles of the island. So, what do you do for a living? I'm a freelance graphic designer, Hanalei said. Wow, that's impressive. So, you're an artist, she said, her eyes sparkling with genuine interest. People seem to think so, but I don't really consider myself an artist, Hanalei replied. Artists are driven by passion, by a need to create. Design is more technical. It's almost like being a construction worker. You're driven by deadlines, moving from one project to the next. There isn't much time to experiment with forms or philosophy when the clock is ticking. What about you? I work for a cruise ship company, Star of Honolulu, she said. I handle public relations and marketing. Have you ever been on our dinner cruise? I know the name, but unfortunately, not yet. Although I've always been interested in the Star, he joked. Maybe I could score some design work from them and get a free cruise out of the deal? Well, I could ask my boss if they're looking to change designers, but usually the ad agency director handles all that. Coco laughed. Hanalei, realizing she was taking his casual remarks seriously, gave her a reassuring smile. Don't worry about it, I was just joking. I know how the advertising industry works, and I have enough clients to keep me busy. You don't need to ask your boss. When she asked how long he had been at it, he told her it had been over 15 years. A career started when he was just 20. Coco looked at him with renewed impressed. Despite his youthful, sun-kissed appearance, he carried a veteran's experience. He simply shrugged. Yeah, I guess it's become something I can do without overthinking. He knew the truth of it. Once creativity becomes a job that must be done endlessly, it loses its artistic endeavor and becomes a craft of repetition. I envy people like you, Coco admitted. I don't have a talent for drawing or painting. My world is promoting the line, planning events, and talking to travel agents. But I love art, all kinds, especially performing arts. She leaned in slightly, shifting the topic to the coming night. By the way, are you going to tribal tonight? What are you going to wear? I'm thinking of painting some tattoos here and there, he replied. The once-a-month circuit party at Fresh had become the epicenter of gay nightlife in Honolulu, and it was growing more crowded with every event. The theme tonight, tribal, with its animalistic and semi-barbarian undertones, resonated perfectly with the current trend of heavy, steam room beats. It was the sound popularized by DJs like Tracy Young, sexy, jungle-infused rhythms that felt primitive and alluring. That sounds great. Good idea, she said, already imagining the scene just as Jim returned to the group. What are you two talking about? Jim asked as he stepped back into the circle. Tonight's tribal party, Coco replied. Jim's eyes lit up with a restless, infectious energy. You're both going? Then you must be coming to next month's Volcano Party too, right? He didn't wait for an answer before pressing on. It's the first real circuit party in Hawaii, with a gay cruise of 2,000 guys joining in. It's going to be massive. His excitement was naked and undeniable. We have to show up for all the travelers coming in from around the world. Hanalei couldn't help but tease him. And those international circuit boys are just coming here to mess us up for fun, right? Coco watched them, a bit detached. As a woman, she didn't feel the same magnetic pull toward a murderous dance floor fueled by testosterone and tribal beats. To her, it was just another party. To Jim, it was an event of seismic proportions. I already got these bell-bottom pants that flare out like a volcano, Jim said, gesturing wildly. Now I just need a tank top that looks like an actual eruption. I'll make one for you, Hanalei offered. It'll be hard to find exactly what you're looking for in a store. Just buy a tight white tank and we can dye it or paint the eruption ourselves. Wow, really? That would be amazing. Jim's mind was already racing. Then how about joining the cruise? I checked online, there are still a few spots left. I just talked to Douglas on the phone, and he's definitely going. Coco laughed, shaking her head. I'll pass. Being trapped on a ship with 2,000 gay men for a week sounds overwhelming. I'll pass too, Hanalei added, echoing her sentiment. So neither of you is going? That sucks, but fine. I'll go with the other guys and have the time of my life, Jim said, undeterred. But anyway, let's go to Douglas's house for a pool party. We might even score some lunch there. Pool party? Hanalei asked. Jim's eyes sparkled. Douglas has a luxurious pool in his backyard. It's the place to be. I don't even know Douglas, Hanalei wondered aloud. Is it really okay for me to just show up? Think of it as a chance to make new friends, Jim reassured him, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. Besides, at Douglas's place, swimwear is optional. Coco's eyes went wide. Oh my, Douglas. If you guys promise to actually wear something while I'm there, I might consider it, to be continued. Swim and listen to the historical gay drama in the center of the Pacific. We are releasing a brand new episode every single day until the epic conclusion of the story. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 15 to 45-minute hit of cinematic historical drama set in the tropical islands of Hawaii, the perfect daily plunge into the shattered world a millennium after 9/11. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full novel now. Bookmark Blue Dolphins. The Novel Playlist, A Great Argead Saga, Alexine, Volume 1. Talesius Playlist, Volume 2, Sacred Band Playlist, and Divine Oracle. Unwritten words behind my novel playlist. Subscribe to follow the waves and currents of Forbidden Paradise love tales. Comment below.